All right, welcome out to our Kansas Children's Internet Protection Act training and technology plan training. So today we have Jeff Hickson from the State Library, our resident expert on Kansas CIPA. And so we'll turn the time over to him.
Thank you, George. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's been helpful to me to do the thinking involved in putting this together. So I'll just go ahead. Whoops, don't want to do that. The purpose of the Kansas Children's Internet Protection Act, I just noticed what it said there, purpose requires. That's not good English. Anyway, the act requires that public libraries have a policy or a procedure in place, both policies and procedures to protect minors from undesirable visual images. And also, this is different from the federal CIPA, that no person has access to pornography or obscene material. The difference there is the harmful to minors thing, all of which are very, very fuzzily defined in law and regulation and statute everywhere. But this is a law that was put in place in Kansas about 4 years ago. So basically, you must have protection measures to ensure that none of this happens. Commonly, we think of the protection measure as an internet filter. That's the most prevalent way libraries have of addressing this, and it's probably the preferred way. There are libraries whose technology protection consists of visual supervision. They have line of sight vision of public access computers and are prepared to go and intervene if they see that that's necessary. To date, I'm not aware of any challenge to that approach. It's something that even when the FCC has been approached about clarifying it, they've sort of dodged the issue and declined to address that. But if we ever hear of any changes to that where they're going to make an actual technology solution required, that will be something we get word out to people about immediately. There are exceptions to this, which, as in many cases between the federal version and the state version of CIPA, these are pretty much duplicated in both places. A patron who is not a minor can request that whatever the measure is be disabled. This, of course, obviously applies mostly to filters. The second bullet point here is a difference between the two. In the federal law, there is reference to legitimate research or other lawful purpose, but it is not quite it doesn't quite rise to the same level. Under federal CIPA, you have a little more leeway or flexibility there. But legitimate research is a pretty broad term, and it's pretty much the case that if library staff is comfortable with what the person is doing, it's acceptable to disable the technology protection measure. Of course, in the case of just visual supervision, this is simply a matter of ignoring what's going on, not ignoring, but allowing what's going on, not intervening. And then, of course, you want to be prepared with a response should any other patron see it and question what's going on. That's the kind of trade-off there. With a filter, you have that to fall back on. If you choose not to filter and say, we're going to monitor this, then you have to take responsibility for dealing with the reaction and what happens in that case. These are the regulations that were adopted at the state library's request to the statute required that there be administrative regulations regarding this. If you look at the law, if you look at the state statute and you look at the regulations, you'll see that they're almost identical. There's very little difference between what the law says and what the regulation says. That frustrates people sometimes. They read the law, then they go to the regulations expecting step-by-step, A through Z guidance as to exactly what they should do. That was a deliberate choice not to do that, to make the regulations as much as possible follow exactly what the law says. And the reason for that is that to have regulations that simply take you by the hand and walk you through the process really defeats the purpose of having the act in the first place. Yes, the main purpose is to ensure that the internet is not used in a harmful way, but it's also to ensure that libraries have a sense of responsibility and ownership, and also of responsibility to their patrons to be sure that the law is enforced in accordance with local standards, so that Johnson County Library down in Oberlin Park doesn't enforce this exactly the same way that Lenora would, for example. So the regulations require that there be a policy adopted by the library board to be sure that these conditions are met and that the information about it is available. The purpose of the policy should be clearly stated. That's pretty easy to do. There's not a lot of need to customize that. It needs to describe how your library will meet the requirements of the Act. And that is one, again, where you have the latitude to explain exactly what your steps are going to be. That's another case where our advice, and I think I'll touch on this again later just to reinforce it. Our advice is not to get terribly specific and detailed in the policy. The policy should be broad, giving you flexibility. If you want to document specific things, specific steps you take, how you go about them, those should be in a procedure. Anything that logically fits into a what do I do document for your staff should be put there, because those are not, those do not really fall under CIPA or Kansas CIPA under ordinary circumstances. And you don't have to worry quite so much about, your decisions or your approach to it being second guess. The third point is really important. The policy should state that the library is required to inform its patrons of standards, rules, and regulations that you follow. And those are carefully chosen words: standards, rules, and regulations. Nothing there about procedures. So what ideals are you conforming to? What are the rules and regulations that employees are required to follow? Those need to be information that's available to your patrons. And then the last one is that they are adopted and are available for review, excuse me. Generally, we advise libraries to meet this last requirement or regulation by posting some kind of notice that simply says the library has an internet security policy, and if you would like to see it, ask at the desk. It's available here. Provide it at the point of access, whatever your library prefers to do. there is a positive outcome for following this beyond just you're complying with the law. And that is that the statute spells out that if you're compliance with the provisions of this act, you will not be, your library will not be liable for damages. If somebody should observe restricted behavior and make an issue of it, a legal issue. If your compliance with the provisions is good, then you have a legal defense against that. This is an area where probably a filter is going to provide more secure evidence that you're in compliance. If your compliance is through, visual observation, that's legitimate. Again, as I said, as far as we know, but just because it's legitimate doesn't mean that it's an instant and immediate defense. It probably is a defense that will require more information on your part, maybe testimony. So it's something to think about. Again, it's a trade-off. Where do you want to put the effort and have the controversy taking place? But ultimately, it's a very good benefit of following the law is that you do have the ability through proper compliance of gaining some protection for the library.
Jeff, real quick, have you heard or seen of any situations in the state where that protection's been needed, or where there's been an issue with First Amendment rights?
I'm not aware of any since this took place. I do remember probably 3 years ago, there was a library that contacted me that said they had observed an incident they thought might lead to a complaint, but ultimately they talked to the patron and they were satisfied with what was done. So I have not ever been made aware of any incident.
Okay, great, thank you.
Couple of slides back, we already went over the requirements for what needs to be in the policy. And this is what I was saying before, this second bullet point. It's not required to put any information in there that you aren't specifically asked for in the statute or the regulations. I always quote, when dealing with this issue, I always quote Linda Schatz, who frequently does our E-rate training here in Kansas. And for years and years and years, helping people fill out E-rate applications, her kind of catchphrase is, "My name is Linda." Meaning if somebody asks you your name, you say your name. You don't say, "My name is Linda Schatz. I live in Iowa. I work for such and such." Because anything you provide that you don't have to provide is available to, and I hate to put it so negatively, but it's available to be used against you. So just be careful. I understand there's kind of psychologically, there's this calming feeling that comes from just loading something up with information, demonstrating over and over again that you've thought it all through and you've imagined every conceivable possibility. But the truth is you can't do that. So if it's possible, we really recommend that you keep it high level, general, policy oriented, not procedure oriented, and that you don't go beyond what you actually are required to provide. Does that make sense? These are the resources that we have to help libraries deal with CIPA and the creation of a policy. And they're on our Kansas CIPA page on the website. I have the URL there for you. Southeast Kansas Library System put together a policy requirement checklist a few years ago. and it's very good. We definitely recommend either when creating or reviewing a policy that you take a look at that. And it also addresses this whole area of a separate document for things that don't need to be in the policy. Actually, I stole that idea from Roger Carswell. There's a template in there that is customizable to create a policy. If you choose to use that, you can just fill it out. It is intended to be designed so that if you have fully filled out each section, you have a pretty good policy. And going back to what George was just saying, since we are not aware of any policies ever being challenged, at least from the state library, we're not aware. The template still is sort of an untried or untested resource, but it is helpful in organizing your thinking. And I want to note here that there's no requirement for you to send us a copy of your policy. This is different than the old days when we had technology plans for E-rate applications, and we did have to have copies of those on file. It's not necessary to send us a plan. Again, this is a case of, do what you need to do, not what, makes you feel better. I mean, people send us copies with a notice from time to time. There's nothing wrong with that. But to be honest, we do not keep them on file because if we don't have it on file, we can't intervene between you and some issue that you don't really want us messing with. There is a list of internet filtering options on the website, and I would use that with caution. I'm aware that it needs to be updated. I can't say at this point that there aren't things on there that are no longer available, but it is on our list of things to update and try to get into a more useful format for you. But at least it gives you some ideas if you or somebody is shopping for a filtering service or device. And finally, we have links directly to the statute and the administrative regulations. So you can, as you always should, go back to the original legal source for your final determination. Or maybe I should say for the issue you're going to get legal advice on, since a lot of things are not really ultimately addressable just by reading, but it's still a good idea to know where to find them and be at least somewhat familiar with what the law and the regulations say.
If it's okay, I'll interject here that all of the public libraries in Northwest Kansas already have filtering software that the system provides for them. So just so everybody's aware that we already have that piece of this puzzle.
Thanks. That's good for me to know. And I think it's also probably the case in the majority of systems. We get fewer questions than we used to about Kansas CIPA. When we early on, when we were getting questions, there were a lot of them that centered around the issue of to filter or not to filter and go another route. I think probably by and large statewide, this is the direction everybody is moving for the most part. There are always going to be a few locations that don't want to do that, but that's fine. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the requirement that the policy be reviewed and approved by the board every 3 years. And you document that has happened through a motion that's approved and recorded in your board meeting minutes. So once every 3 years, at the very least, the board should look at that document, either make changes and approve a new version, or simply approve it as written. And it's a good idea then on that policy to have a copy that shows the date of the last review. A few years ago, we started including a question about this on the annual survey, so that anytime you're filling out, every year when you fill that survey out, you either have to agree with or change a question about when did your board last review the policy. At the state library, periodically, once and sometimes twice a year, depending on what the range of dates looks like, we will contact libraries that, according to our records, are either close to that 3-year deadline or have already passed it. Then when we get word back, if you notify us that, yes, our board reviewed the policy or we changed it and approved it as of this date, then we keep track of that so that we can pre-populate that in the annual survey. Generally, we always try to do this beginning about October so that there's time for libraries to have a board meeting, get that done. And when the survey comes out, your date is already correct in there, up to date, and you don't have to worry about it. So with that in mind, whenever you do that, review or adopt your policy, if you notify us at our E-rate address along with the date, and I realize that E-rate is not exactly, I suppose it's sort of a logical conclusion, but it just happens that email address goes to exactly the people that deal with this, namely Holly and myself. So just send us an email saying we've reviewed or updated our policy. Here's the new date. And we'll let you know that we've updated our records with that. And finally, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll just kind of reinforce it again, that Kansas CIPA and CIPA refer to two different things. Kansas CIPA is state law, but it is modeled very much on the federal version that's been around for well over a decade now. So it's, when you're talking about CIPA, be aware that there's two different versions of it and be sure you're talking about the right one. The other important difference to remember is that there's no federal requirement for libraries to comply with their CIPA unless you are receiving federal funds. That's why it's always something you have to certify on E-rate applications, et cetera. Kansas CIPA does not have that limitation. It applies to every public library, whether you receive federal funds, state funds. Well, I shouldn't say, well, yeah, it wouldn't make any difference whether if you're a locally funded public library that did not receive state funds in form of state aid or some other way, you would still be required to comply with CIPA. The only limitation on which libraries would probably be legal establishment. If you're a volunteer run organization, not receiving tax money, not legally established as a library, you probably would not have to comply.
That was going to be a question I had, because we have a club library here in Northwest and they don't even have computers. So I figured that since they're not legally established and they don't have computers, they wouldn't have to worry about this. So
yeah, I think that's true. At the same time, I would say if they ever do get computers and decide to provide public access, the potential benefit of being able to say we're in compliance with this law probably would outweigh the trouble of being in compliance and being able to demonstrate that they're in compliance, politically and in other ways. It's probably would be a good thing to do, but I don't believe anybody's going to come after them if they don't. Are there any other questions? Anything I could go over again? That email address I gave you earlier is here on the screen again. Anything related to Kansas CIPA, that's the place to send it. And always we have our disclaimer, we're not lawyers, we're not going to give you legal advice, but in terms of our interpretation of best practices, where you are in your review status, what you need to do, just get in touch with us and we'd be happy to try to help.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Are there any questions for Jeff here before we let him saunter off if he wishes? Okay. Hearing none, thank you, Jeff. We appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you again. Appreciated the opportunity.
And if you wish to stay around, you're welcome to. If not, we also welcome you to take off if you'd like.
Okay. Well, I would like to stay, but I probably had better go.
Okay.
So
All right.
thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So now we will shift over to technology planning. Can everybody see what's on my screen there? Okay. All right. Do I need to make it any larger or is that good?
Yeah, you might want to make it a little larger.
Okay. And I will be sharing this out as well. Let's see what 120 looks like.
Is this going to be recorded, George?
Yes, we are
It's-
recording.
Okay.
All right. Is that better?
Yeah, it looks better to me.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about technology planning. And I will tell you that in any library planning that I think we do, it should be simple and effective and efficient. I'm not one that thinks that a plan should be, 25 pages minimum or anything like that. In this case, I would say that your technology plan would probably be about 3 pages. And that's because you're going to have some inventory information and other information added into it just to help with the understanding of where the plan is going and what you're doing in the library. So in this case, I've put together a sample plan, and if I were to fill this out completely, it would probably end up being about 3 pages. And I will tell you the inputs and things like that you put into this, we at the system here will help you do that. As a matter of fact, I know Dave has quite a bit of inventory information about the technology that's in your library. And the rest of this information should be pretty simple for you to get your hands on, for you to create a technology plan. So I started off the plan here that I'm using as a sample, of course, with just the title and name of the library. Then we've included when the plan was approved, and I just made up a date there. And also then you want to make sure that you have the period of time that this plan is going to be covering. I put in a bit of a vision/mission statement for the technology in the library. This is something you can or you don't have to do. The reason I usually like vision or mission statements in my planning is it helps you with making decisions. It can be a filter through which you put any decision, any technology against, determine whether that is a technology that you want in your library or whether that decision is yay or nay. In my case, I just did a simple one. And you'll see in yellow, I highlighted the main point here. So somewhere public library will provide needed technology services and training to support growth and entertainment in our community. I'm taking into account that I know the kids are going to come in after school and they're going to be playing Roblox or whatever the new game is. Likewise, you're going to have patrons that come in and want to play solitaire. So that's why I included entertainment. You will have some people that are coming in and using it for research. They'll be using it to create a resume or look for jobs, any sort of purpose. I put needed technology because it's going to all depend on the demand that's coming from your community. If your community has a demand to have a 3D printer somewhere because there isn't one in your community, then maybe that is a technology need that the library can fill. And so that's why I specifically use that, that terminology there. So after you create a statement of some sort, if you wish, then you want to make sure you have an inventory of all the equipment in your library. And again, like I said, Dave can help with quite a bit of this. He'll know what switches and routers and how many patron computers you have, what the years are on those, what their internal capacities are, as well as software and things of that nature. And when you're doing this, you also want to take into account other things such as your Xerox copier, if you have one, or printers. If you have a PlayStation for the teens, you'll include that along with the TV, things like that. Just taking into account all the technology equipment that you have in the library. One thing I also don't want to overlook is policy. So what policies do you have for the technology in your library? So if you don't have a 3D printer yet and you want to purchase one, well, then that'll be added to the inventory when you purchase it. But then you'll probably want to have some sort of a policy. So then you would include that in here too, that you have a policy for 3D printers once you get that written and approved by the board. Furniture. A lot of people don't think about this, but this actually is part of that technology. If the patron computer number 3 has a desk broken, well, you're going to want to replace that. And since it's tied to the use of that computer, include that here in your plan. If you decide to do any upgrades or things like that, or get a broken chair, then it can be included in this. Software. And all of us use quite a bit of different software. I, again, just did the minimum here just because I was trying to get this created. And so I put Verso on there since that is the ILS system that we use. But you would also, Microsoft 365, if that's what you use, and any other software that you use in the library too, as patrons or as staff. And then, of course, any community training opportunities you provide, and also any staff training or staff development. And so in this case, I just used as an example, say your library does a basic computer class every year or every half year. Include that, as and if you have any other kind of classes to help people with technology. This is so that you can go back and you can look and you say, okay, we've got these 2 classes. Maybe we want to add a third. Or, haven't had a lot of people come into that basic computer class because people are using their phones more. Maybe you want to get rid of that one and add another one. And so this just allows you to kind of take a look with the board and see what all is being done in the library technologically, yeah, okay. And then, of course, any training that you're doing as staff. So if you have your staff taking courses on how to use Excel, or things like that, or courses that you'd like your staff members to participate each year, provide those here too, so that you have an idea of what training you want your staff to go through in order to be aware and to be proficient to help others in the library. Okay, so this is what I call kind of our inventory for the library. So this tells you where you're at right now. And you'll notice that what I've said there is that, so if you get a 3D printer, you want to add it to this. So that comes back to the idea that our plan, whether it be our library's plan or our technology plan or whatever plan we're talking about, it is a living document, and it is something that should be updated and changed and looked at almost monthly, in my opinion. And we'll kind of get to why that is down here in the goals section. But it is a living document that should be constantly in your forefront. Okay, so now what I've done here is I've made a 3-year plan. And so outside of the 3 years that we have here, I also then have included some general goals. You can do it however you want. If you want to include all your goals under the years, or if you want to have some that you say are going to happen all 3 years. So instead of having them under each year, break them out and just call them general goals. Whatever you want to do, however you want to structure this is completely up to you and your local control there. But I did it this way just to give you an example of that. So my general goal is we will replace computers every 3 years. So let's say that we've talked with Dave and Dave says, hey, 3 years is about the life of a patron computer or a staff computer or both. And you determine, okay, so every 3 years, we're going to change that computer out and get a new one. It could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, it could be whatever. So in this plan, I've just used an example of 3 years. So our action is going to be to create a timeline that has all the computers on there and when they're going to be replaced. Then we're going to include in our budget funds to replace those computers. So let's say we end up changing 2 computers or 3 computers every year. Then we want to make sure that we have in our budget funds for those 3 computers. And so a good way to get that information is from Dave. Get an idea of what a computer costs now. If you're looking at into the future, a couple of years, you might want to bump that amount up by a couple percentage points, just so that you make sure that you have the funds in mind to purchase them. But at the beginning of each year, when you're doing at the time when you're doing your budgeting, you can always contact him again and say, okay, so what do you think a computer is going to cost next year? And Dave has a pretty good idea of what that's going to be. And so making sure you have that funding, or if you want to, you can say, we'll have some funding, but we'll match that with a grant to Hanson Foundation or a grant to Midwest Energy or a grant request to some other organization, local organization in town, or we'll do a fundraiser. Making sure you outline all that in your goal so that you know what you're going to be doing is wonderful, so that you know that, okay, if we're going to have a fundraiser, then that's going to be a goal for this year. And so then I need to make sure that I put in place all the things that I need in order to do that fundraiser or write that grant. And I didn't put a time on this, I should have, but you want to make sure that you put some sort of a time limit on there. So say it's going to be done by March 1st of each year that we're going to purchase these new computers and have Dave come down and install them and have it done by that time each year. So that is my general goals. So then I took and I created then a goal for each year here. So for 2021, I put in there as a sample goal to replace the Wi-Fi router. Say the Wi-Fi router is getting older because you have it in your inventory with a date next to it that says, hey, it's getting to be 10 years old, and you talk to Dave and he says, yeah, that's it's pretty late life for that router. We probably need to look to get it changed. So then you can start making the plan for 2021 to change that router out. And so your action would be to work with Dave to determine a replacement type and cost, and then budget the funds for that replacement. And again, I didn't add a time on there, but you'll want to make sure that you have it, set that you'll do it by this date, just so that you have a time period within to work to get that accomplished. Okay, then for 2022, I put as a goal that you'd like to buy 4 laptops because you want to start a Girls Who Code Club in your library. So the action you'll need is to work with Dave to determine the needed equipment and the cost, write a Midwest Energy grant, a Girls Who Code grant, and budget any extra funds that you might need for the project. And then complete the project before summer 2022. So you want to have all the grants submitted, computers purchased, club organized and ready to go by the summer of 2022, so that you can launch the club at the beginning of the summer. This would then bring in the kids to do something in the summer when it comes to coding or other things. And so this is just, again, a sample goal that you may have that you'll put on here. Again, when you're writing goals, just a reminder that you want to make sure that they're achievable, that they're measurable, that they're specific, they're relevant, and that you have a timeline or a timeliness to them, so that you can go back and say, yes, I've got this accomplished, or yes, I need to add this to my calendar to get this done by this time. Okay, and then the last component that I would have is a timeline. And this would be just basically a simpler view of those general goals. And I started to make one here. So for 2021, replace 2 patron computers, 1 staff computer, and replace the Wi-Fi router. So it takes basically everything that was above there and puts it in simpler form, timeline form, so you can see it. So then the next one, we put 2022, Right Midwest Energy Grant, Girls Who Code Grant, purchase 4 laptops, start a Girls Who Code club, replace maybe 2 more patron computers and another staff computer. And then that would be your goal, your view of it in timeline form for 2022. And so that's it. I mean, it's simple and easy. You can add more detail if you'd like, but I definitely wouldn't get too complicated, because if you get it too complicated and too challenging to write, then you're going to do it. It's going to be daunting, and you're going to end up putting it on a shelf and not looking at it again, and then it was a complete waste of time. But the other piece of it is making sure that you're looking at this regularly. And like I said, I would look at it monthly, maybe have it part of the agenda for the board meeting, so that they can kind of see how things are coming with the plan, so they can say, oh, hey, I see here you're going to replace the Wi-Fi router. How's that going? And then you can give a report saying, oh yeah, I talked to Dave, we're going to do this router, and it's going to come out of the budget. And then once I get the information, I'll bring it to you and get this approved and all that, just so that there's open communication between you and the library board at all times. Again, I don't know applicability for this in other libraries. I would think that the plan could be used in school libraries or any other libraries if you're in charge of those budgets for technology. But in most cases, I think there are other departments that do that, and so that would be a little more of a challenge to implement something like this in another library. So this is probably more specific to public libraries. Okay, so any questions? I just gave you the quick rundown, and any thoughts, questions, ideas? Now let's see, I see Karen's here, and Karen, you're really good about replacing your computers on a schedule. You want to share with us how you have done that in the past?
Well, I've tried to follow our technology plan that we have. Sometimes we end up doing more than that, but we try to rotate ours and put we change them out and move them to our children's section when we get a new computer.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
And then we put the ones that were on the adult side, on the children's side, and then we rotate them out.
Okay.
So not that it really matters because the kids use both sides, but the ones that are on the children's side are a little bit older than the ones on the other side. So anyway, that's kind of how we do it. And I try to follow that technology plan that we have.
Okay, and what is your schedule for that? Is it every 3 years, 5 years?
For the plan?
Yeah.
I try to change out some
for
of
the
the
computers.
I try to do some of them every year.
Okay.
I try to do 1 or 2 just to keep so that it's not so expensive and to keep a rotation going. So
Okay.
I try to do 1 or 2.
And do you do it based on age, like
yes,
once they hit that 3-year or 4-year mark, or okay.
Yeah, I kind of go by what Dave, but he'll say, these are the oldest, so let's we need to get those changed out. So unless something comes up and we're having issues with one or something like that, then we have to change a little bit, but I try to follow that plan that we have.
Okay, good.
Is there a, do you have the goals per year of how many things you're going to change out? Do you have once that's done, do you document what things were actually done?
Yeah, I try to, yes. we try to, so that when, and then I can update that technology plan easier if I know when we've moved computers out.
Right. And
So
so
it's
that's
easier
where,
to update.
that's where it would come back to this inventory, Mary, that
That's just,
is on the screen here. That's where you would then document that, okay, we've changed these out. I didn't put a lot of detail into this. There's a lot more detail you probably should put into it. So for instance, your 5 patron computers, you know, you could actually break that down once you get going into a cycle. And so you could say patron computer 1 and 2, and then you'll say we replace those, say, in, I don't know, 5/2/2019, and then you'll have patron computer 3 and 4 that you did in 20, and then maybe patron computer 5 and 6 that you did in 18. And then that way you have an idea of the year that these computers are, and then you'll know which ones you'll need to replace just by looking at this document instead of going over and manhandling the machine to see what the date is on it and things like that.
The one thing I noticed that we do not have in our technology plan that I just now realized that was our cameras.
Yes.
And we've never added those to our tech plan, but I think we probably need to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, because those will have an end of life as well.
And I wondered also about the MakerBot. Is that on ours or is that on yours?
That should be on yours.
Okay,
Yep, because it's we've given that to you
okay.
for your library. So
So I did notice that that was one thing that the cameras and that MakerBot, because it's time for us to do a new plan. So, or to update our plan. So I was making notes of things that we had not had on our plan in the past. So
yeah. Now another piece of this too that for budgeting wise, you should always have some funds budgeted in case there's something that just happens.
yeah, true.
You might have a computer that's just gonna, I don't know, drop the hard drive, so you need to buy a new hard drive for it. You know, having a few extra dollars in there in case something happens is always a good idea in case an emergency occurs.
Well, and sometimes you don't really know what the needs are going to be too.
Right.
I mean, they can change. I mean, when you do those plans, it's nice to think that you have everything covered, but then all of a sudden you have something come up and you're like, oh, we really need to add a laptop, or, you know.
Yeah.
So
That's right. Absolutely. And I think that's where it needs to be, that living document. So, you know, say you're in the middle of 2021 and this was your only goal here, to change that Wi-Fi router. And then of course, your general goal of changing out the computers. Well, let's say there is demand for a new technology that's come out. Say people want virtual reality. Well, you can always come back in and say, okay, our goal is going to be purchase a VR, I think they're headsets. So now, you know, from that, you're going to need the funding for it. So how are we going to do that? Maybe we have extra funds in our technology fund that, you know, we were leaving there for something else, but we don't want to do that now. Well, you can shift that over, or maybe say you're going to match that with Midwest Energy Grant or some other grant. You know, then you can put that in there and you can change this document to meet your needs. And then once you buy it, make sure it's up in the inventory and you're moving on then.
George, is this something that the board should vote on and have in their minutes
Yes.
so that there'll be like a revision date on it whenever they talk about it?
Yep. And if you do a revision like this, just do it, bring it to the board, tell them, hey, this is the demand, this is the need. And this is what I think needs to be done, and then they can approve it again and it can be revised again. I mean, those votes don't take long, you know, for that to happen. Now, the other piece of this that will happen probably on an annual basis is you will want to run any statistics on this plan that you have. So let's say For instance, we have the MiFi units now in the libraries or the lendable internet. You'll want to run those statistics and make sure that what you're paying for that that service is meeting the needs of your community and meeting the needs of more than just a few people. So for instance, you'll want to find out how many times it's been used, how much data has been used, and then take that and compare that with your cost to see what the cost per patron is, and gather stories about it. So if, like Karen has seen in her library, or the school uses it for wrestling tournaments, or coaches use it for students who are on the bus when they're coming back from something so that they can do homework. Those stories will be more than just the data. Those will tell you bigger impacts than what the data can tell you. But that data is good to also evaluate a program and make sure that it's still a functioning program. How many times people use your computers a day, how many people connect to your Wi-Fi, things like that, if you can track that.
Is there ever going to be an affordable way to track the hotspots because we have people sitting outside of our library all the time using ours, and we have no way to really know.
Right.
But it seems not affordable.
Well, the problem with some of our libraries, the Next Tech libraries, is that Next Tech doesn't track that information. So we cannot get that information. Is yours the same way with Eagle, or do you just have? Yeah, so unless Dave sets up the routers to track that information, and I'm not even sure that he can. You guys are switching over to the new Meraki, right?
No.
Oh, you're not? Okay. Yeah, then he might not be able to set that up for you. That might be Pioneer. I'll talk to him more about it. I know that he keeps trying to figure out a way of doing it.
I occasionally will, do a ping, to see how many items are on. I do that. What is it, ping or whatever?
Oh yeah, the ping test.
Yes, a ping, and just to see. But I'm not here 24 hours a day, and I do know I'll come by here and there'll be a couple cars sitting outside using it. So, and it is hard. You want to be able to use that stat.
Oh yeah.
But you can't really, because you don't really have for secure, really a way to know for sure.
Yep.
So
that's right.
Because sometimes when you do those pings, boy, there's a lot, but then you got to consider everybody's phone, and they may not even be using it, but it's connected.
On there.
So, yeah. So.
Yeah, I know he's always looking for ways to do that. I mean, he's even talked with Next Tech here about seeing if they would even just get broad numbers for us.
Yeah.
And they said they won't even do that. It gets too much. It becomes too much of a liability for them.
I'm sure it does.
So, yeah.
But it's always on the state report.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you're like, sorry.
Yep, NA, because I can't answer this question because
that's right. I can't answer it. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I know that Dave continues to search for solutions there, so hopefully we'll find one. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Mary, you look.
Are you gonna send a copy of this to us?
Yes, I will.
Attachment. Okay. Thank you.
You betcha. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here today. That's all I have. Any general questions or any other comments before we close? Okay, Hearing none, I will stop the recording and thank you for being here and have a good rest of your day.